Welcome to AstroChat with Anne Sundell, Kimberly Williams, and Monika Anna. We are three professional astrologers living in three separate countries, coming together every new and full moon to share our 3 points of view on astrology. Whether you enjoy deep dives into the current transits, or you are just beginning to learn about astrology for the first time, there is a place for you here. All that is required is an appreciation for astrology, along with a respect for the various traditions within it. So grab a mug of coffee, your favorite cup of tea, or any other beverage of your choice, and join us for a chat on the astrology of the next 2 weeks. Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to another AstroChat. Today it is myself, Kimberly Williams, and I'm joined by Monika Anna. Anne Sundell is off being busy doing astrology things elsewhere, but will hopefully be back with us in 2 weeks when we return again. Today, we're going to be talking about the full moon of June 21st. While here in the States, it's on June 21st. In the Central Time Zone, it's at 8:08 p.m. Across the pond, it'll be the following day on the 22nd at roughly 2:07 a.m. in Great Britain, 4:07 a.m. over in Finland. And of course, if you live elsewhere, feel free to adjust to your time zone. We're looking at a full moon at 1 degree, 7 minutes of Capricorn. And before we dive in and start unpacking it, just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the bell to be notified. If you are listening on a podcast, please comment, rate us. It helps the show tremendously, and it'll help you be reminded the next time we're back. We're looking at the time period from the 21st to roughly the 5th of July, which is when the next new moon in Cancer will happen. And during this time, we have some interesting things happening. In addition to the full moon, we're going to see that Saturn will go retrograde in Pisces on the 29th. And shortly thereafter, Neptune is going to go retrograde also in Pisces on the 2nd. And of course, roughly 24 hours before this full moon, we had the summer solstice, the sun's ingress into Cancer. So all of that is pretty exciting information to look at and to unpack. As usual, we're going to start off by looking at our Sabian symbol. And before we go there, I just want to throw out a little transparency moment that we're going to try to keep this short because both Monika and I are under the weather and Anne cannot be here. Please bear with us if things seem just a bit off every once in a while. Yeah. All right, take it away, Monika.
So this Sabian symbol reads 3 stained glass windows in a Gothic church, 1 damaged by war, which is interesting symbol for this lunation. As we start unpacking what's happening with this lunation, it's interesting to talk about the beauty of the Gothic church, the beauty of stained glass window, the beauty of those holy and sacred places that often become a trigger for war. I've heard somewhere years ago a quote that there's never been a war more vicious and more damaging than a religious war. Because ultimately, if you're fighting for a land, if you're fighting for economic reasons, at some point the war becomes it becomes not a great business, right? But if we fight for religious beliefs, that can turn incredibly vicious. And then because it's more to do with our beliefs than actually the business of war, the business of the land and the resources that we're fighting for, it can become too prolonged and too damaging. So it's a really interesting symbol for this full moon in Capricorn that brings those two symbols together, the war and the damage that war can do, and those holy sacred spaces that we have within us and also in the world around us. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking that as we go through our transits.
Yeah, I love the idea that it is about these beautiful windows in the sacred space and churches and religious buildings, religious places. They're institutions of a sort, right? And that's so Capricorn. That's so a moon in Capricorn is the institutions that guide us and that we live by. And yet it's because of institutions like our governments, our politics, our religion that we often go to war. And when you were reading that, I just couldn't help but think about the impact of actually seeing this. When I was over in England last time, I had the good fortune of going to a few older churches, and they would have windows that had been blown out in World War II and since replaced. And you could see the difference between one side of the building and these really old stained glass, and then the newer ones that have been created and put in to repair and replace. And the juxtaposition of how things from the old system versus the new system look also really stood out to me. So there's just something about this idea of the old way versus the what has been damaged, what has been destroyed, and how that makes room for perhaps a newer mindset coming forward. And makes me wonder if we need to look at what has been broken or damaged and maybe consider, do we need to repair that or not? I don't know. It's one of those Sabian symbols that really makes you stop and think about the implications. And in this time that we live in, the fact that it is talking about war, and when you were reading the description to me before we hopped on of other people's idea of what this means, you were saying how it can also tie into terrorism, into war, into things like that. Yeah, it gives you pause, doesn't it?
It's also interesting that in the past, the religious places, whether there were Buddhist monasteries, mosques, churches, there were also places of refuge. There were places of sanctuary. You could knock at the doors and ask for sanctuary, ask for asylum. Those were the places that they were outside of the, so to speak, a common law. The landlord or the king couldn't just knock in. They could, obviously. The power is always the power. But there was something around those sanctuaries that it was power above that earthly power. And there was a place where people could feel safe and secure from reality, safe and secure from persecution, safe and secure from the current events.
Yeah.
And no matter what, they were respected. Those places of refuge, they were respected. So obviously not always, it's not like 100%, everyone will always avoid that. But there was that feeling that you do not necessarily fight with a place that is considered as sacred and
Mm.
sacred.
Yeah.
So it's interesting where in today's world we can find those places of refuge. Can we find those places of refuge
Hmm.
anymore?
Another thought that occurred to me as you were speaking there too is this idea that how Capricornian is it to say this building has been damaged, but it's still a building. A Gothic cathedral is still a Gothic cathedral. Whether it has a roof, whether it has all the windows, we can still look at the remains of the ruins in Glastonbury. It doesn't have walls, it doesn't have a ceiling. It's the remains that are there, and yet people still gather. People still go there for the sacred ceremonies or for that solace that they want to get. To me, it almost makes me think about the energy of Capricorn of have work to do and I'm going to do this work, regardless of whether everything is perfect or ideal or not. Whereas Virgo and Pisces would get hung up with things aren't perfect enough. But Capricorn, let's make it work. Let's use it however we can use it. And I think sometimes that can be a good thing to remember, that we don't have to keep trying to get everything fixed. Some of our systems that we live in society are really broken and they're not going to get fixed overnight, but things still need to happen. We still need to take care of the homeless. We still need to have police. We still need to do things even in the midst of systems that don't quite work the way many of us would like them to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so true. So here it is, the full moon in Capricorn. The full moon, we start with the new moon in the midst of December, around December winter solstice, and here we are at the fullness of that moon in summer solstice. So we're halfway through the year now. And full moon in Capricorn, for me, it's this kind of, again, a yearly accomplishment. So we're already in a summer. We're already in the fullness of what we could have accomplished up till this point. Everything that we've planted, the seeds that we dreamt in the middle of the winter, all the plans that we had for 2024, our New Year's resolution that probably went out of the window by 14th of January. This is interesting time to go back to that. I mean, if you keeping a journal, like a maybe Astroluna journal or any other moon journal, if you're keeping a journal of your lunation, if you go back to what is it that you dreamt in the middle of the winter, in the middle of those dark months, this is the fullness. This is where it should manifest itself. This is where, again, Capricorn talks about if you were consistent, if you were strict with yourself, if you were disciplined with yourself, by now you should see the fullness of your work. You should see what you've accomplished in the last 6 months. And Capricorn is very much that kind of master coach that tells you actually discipline, consistency, showing up, whether it's a training because you're an athlete, whether it's showing up at work, whether it's showing up in your marriage, consistency. What's the other word I'm looking for? And I forgot. So what I'm trying to say is Capricorn is trying to teach us around if we are consistent and if we have that practical approach, we can really build something. Capricorn teaches us about achieving our goals through putting one foot instead of the other in front of the other. We're climbing that mountain, we know the track, we know where we want to get, we know the stops along the way, and it's really about putting that one foot in front of the other until we reach that goal. It's not about having a detour, it's not about seeing the squirrel, it's not about, oh, I might just change my mind and go down and then come back the other way. It's actually, if you want to go and achieve that goal, those are the steps. Go with that consistency. But full moon in Capricorn does something else on top of that. On top of bringing those achievements that we've worked hard for, full moon in Capricorn shows light or shines light on that polarity between Capricorn and Cancer, between what is it that we're building in the world out there, in our especially work life, and how does our roots, our home life is actually nurturing that. Does it nurture that? We need to find the Cancer Capricorn polarity teaches us about finding balance in the home life and the work life, in what is our roots and where we come from to where we want to go and grow. And full moon in Capricorn is a brilliant way of showing us where the shadows hide. Are we too rigid in doing something out there in the world that our family life, our home life suffers because we don't have enough time, because we're too tired, because we're too stressed to be present for other people? And those roots that's supposed to be strong are not getting enough nurturing? Or are we so scared of being out there in the world, so not prepared for that responsibility and accountability that Capricorn expects of us, that we hide at home, that we hide behind our families, that we hide in a nice and comfy seats of Cancerian themes. So this is a really good place in a year to actually look at the shadow side and look, where do we have blind spots on this axis?
Yeah, totally. And following up with what you said there about the shadow, because anyone who listens to us knows we're always talking about full moons are a great time to do shadow work, to get clarity on maybe what is hiding in our shadows. So I feel like this is a good time to really think about, do I take responsibility for myself and for my life? Am I putting that responsibility on someone else? Am I projecting? When we start to feel limited because our boss won't give us time off, we start to feel limited because somebody else has authority or control over us. When we feel we can't move forward in life because I don't have the certificate that I need, when we're waiting for some external form of authority to give us permission to move, it could be that we're also avoiding or delaying taking that personal responsibility ourselves. Because chances are there are times or ways that we could make some steps in spite of those obstacles, or that we could find a way to work through those. Remember, the whole thing about Capricorn energy, it is ruled by the planet of Saturn. There's always a certain element of, there is some kind of delay that is innate when we're dealing with Capricorn energy. Things do not happen lickety split. They take some time. There may be an obstacle or challenge to overcome. And I think this is about adulting, taking responsibility, owning our own, I'm good enough. One of the things I find can be a real big shadow with Capricorn is falling into this misbelief, that somehow I'm not enough. I'm not strong enough, I'm not good enough, or another way of thinking of that is I'm not ready. Yes, I wanna do XYZ, but I'm not ready yet. So this might be a time to look at, is that a true statement? And if so, what
Mm.
actions can we take? Or is that a form of projection because I don't wanna own responsibility and I don't wanna own my own inner authority? Embrace your inner king, your inner queen, and step into it. The other thing that is a big shadow side for me with Capricorn is, are we living in a box? Even those of us who don't like labels and don't like to be boxed in and embrace our inner rebel Aquarian side, we can create our own boxes and then get stuck. You know, I'm on the path for financial success and now I'm working 3 jobs and I don't have time to be at home with my family, as an example. Are we stuck or trapped in some kind of box? And is that one of our own making or is that one imposed? How do we maybe take down some of those walls so that we're not quite so tight, so feeling trapped, if you will?
Yeah. One more thing that kind of came to my head when you were talking about responsibility, and I see that in corporate world all the time, reenactment of Capricorn Cancer parental roles.
Mm,
If we don't mature in Cancer and we don't take that parental responsibility towards ourselves, if we don't know how to parent ourselves, that is reenacted in a in a workspace a lot, and it's not just in a corporate world, but I think that level of authority, we project the parental figures on that level of authority, and the amount of people who are getting lost in that reenactment is quite
yeah,
astounding, where suddenly you can see adult people in their 30s, 40s, 50s reenacting the 12-year-old boy that they were, and he or she doesn't want to take accountability, or they're overdoing it because they came from the family when the accountability and responsibility was on their shoulders since they were little. And then they're that workaholic, overdoing and doing for their friends and for their colleagues. And it's really interesting to see. And again, the full moon in Capricorn is a good place to start, to see that shadow. What is it? How do I parent myself? What kind of parents I had? And where do I take that accountability at work and where do I project it? When
yeah,
so many people say at work, it's like, oh, that's not my responsibility. That's not in my job description. That's not, maybe it's not. Maybe to the dot, it's not. But that doesn't still mean that you wouldn't go and say that to someone. If you saw
right.
a child on the playground falling over, you wouldn't go, oh, that's not my child. That's not my responsibility. You would still go and say, "Do you know what? Excuse me, whose child is it?" And you would still help, even though you're not necessarily have to take accountability for it. But there is that block, and that goes down to Capricorn, Cancer, unresolved issues in the chart.
Great point. Great point.
Thank you. We've both experienced that.
Yeah, so much so.
I think to a yeah, lesser or yeah, higher extent, but
Yeah. So let's pull up the chart and talk about some of the things that are jumping out for us during this 2-week window. Hang on one second. Let me get it. So here's our chart that we've brought up. If you're listening to us on a podcast, feel free to run your own chart. The one that we have is on an Aries wheel. So it doesn't matter where you live to be looking at this. And it's set to 8:08 p.m. Central Time. And here we have the moon at 1 degree 7 minutes of Capricorn opposite the sun at the same degree and minute position of Cancer. The sun has a tight conjunction with Venus and Mercury in addition to that opposition. There's also a T square. I guess let's just start off by talking about what jumps out to us rather than trying to outline everything, right? For me, the big thing here is the fact that this opposition is squaring by about half a degree orb Neptune. Neptune's at 29 degrees of Pisces. It's stationary, barely moving because it's going to go retrograde in just a little while. So for me, that is the one thing that really jumps off the page. And then in addition to that, the fact that the sun has just entered Cancer. It's not in Cancer, it's within 24 hours of the sun's ingress. So I feel like both of those add extra energy, extra intensity to what the sun is bringing and Neptune is bringing. What are the ones that stand out for you, Monica?
the first one was the Pluto and Sun. Pluto at 1 Aquarius and a Sun at 1 Cancer. And that Quincunx there pulls that Pluto into that full moon discussion, which we'll unpack in a minute. And the other one was a close sextile between Mars in Taurus at 9 degrees Taurus and Mercury at 9 degrees Cancer as well. So close to that moon. So those are the two that stood out for me when I looked at that chart.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and unpack them. Hang on one second. Let me close this out.
I have to say that Pluto really brings into the conversation that we've just had around the Sabian symbol and around accountability with Capricorn. For me, there is a reason why Aquarius, the rebel of the zodiac, the eccentric of the zodiac, the Uranian spark of the zodiac, comes after Capricorn. For me, to actually be that eccentric, to be rebellious, but for the good reasons, to be rebellious, to build something and not just ruin something, you have to actually understand the Capricornian Cancerian polarity. And it's that difference between this kind of a rebellious teenager that doesn't know why they rebel. It's just a lot of hormones going on. This kind of very stereotypical, I'm going to put my foot down. I don't really know why, but I'm just against the authority, versus the kind of rebellious spark that comes after you've been through the system, you understood the system, you lived through the system, and now you understand what doesn't work and what needs to be destroyed, dismantled, and changed. And this is the difference between the kind of rebel for a cause and kind of rebel for the sake of rebellion. And for me, that Aquarian energy is, I've seen what is, I've been through that, I understood, I learned. I can now break those rules because I know which rules to break and
Right.
which rules potentially need to be broken, right? Instead of just, you know what, I'm just going to have this kind of rebellious spirit of, I'm just going to be a rebel for no cause, no reason, just because I feel like it. And it's really interesting bringing again into that Sabian symbol between that sacredness and spaces of refuge and potentially the war and a power. And for me, that Pluto and Aquarius brings that interesting rebellious spark into our society, into our mundane life for the next 20 years. But it's because it's highlighting the 20 years that it's been in Capricorn and then learned what does not work,
Yeah.
what doesn't work. It's very often, it's been through the system inside out and know how to fix that system. But the people who are still outside of the system or well within conviction that the system works can't see that because it's well ahead of them. So it's really interesting time to see Pluto going into the Aquarius and trying to fix things. And us still holding on to that Capricornian structure and say, okay, what if we're going to lose that structure? What else will we have? But again, for me, it comes back to, if I can repeat myself again, it comes back to parental accountability. Do I have accountability for myself? Do I take responsibility for my own actions, for my own emotions? Can I self-regulate emotionally and not rely on other people to do it? Can I step into our favorite word recently, adulting, full on? Or do I unconsciously or consciously push that accountability onto other people, onto the guy in a taxi that didn't do what I asked them to do, or my boss, or my mother, or someone else, or my partner? Do I push that accountability onto other people instead of taking accountability for my own self? If I do, it's easier. I feel like it's easier stepping into Aquarius. And what astrology teaches us, and that's the beauty of astrology, both signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, traditionally were ruled by the same planet, Saturn.
Yeah.
I think Saturn's getting really bad rap these days because modern astrology pushed Aquarius towards the Uranus and Uranian energy, which absolutely Aquarian has that Uranian archetype there. But traditionally, they were both born out of Saturn, and Saturn was also a rebel, right? Saturn rebelled against his own father. So there is that. You rebel against the old order, trying to create new one. But as we've seen through time and again in history, the new revolution doesn't necessarily bring all those dreams come true. It creates another structure, another Saturnian structure that again might not necessarily fit everyone.
Yes, agreed. And, for me, the quote that keeps going through my head over and over as I'm looking at Pluto and Aquarius is, I believe it's from Gandhi, right? And it's be the change you want to see in the world. Like you were saying, it's not about being a rebel for the sake of rebellion. It's being part of the change. It's figuring out that transformation is not going to happen if I'm not part of that process. And I really like this side of Pluto and Aquarius. And the fact that it's quincunx, or some people would call that inconjunct the sun in Cancer, there's some change that has to happen on both sides. So the family dynamics, if I'm dealing with the family of Cancer, or my country's common culture, if we're looking at Cancer as more like homeland and country, the whatever it is that is the unit that supports me, that feels very Cancerian, needs to make some changes so that we can bring this transformation energy in. And by the same token, it isn't just everyone out there needs to change. I have to also make changes. So if we're stuck in a family dynamic where, there's some issue I have with one of my parents, and I see now I'm repeating that with my own child or with a sibling, okay, I have to choose to not react to that trigger just as much as they have to make a modification and not necessarily engage in that trigger. It's a two-way street here. And that to me is the challenge with a quincunx. But the other challenge is that we've got the opposition to the moon. The sun and the moon are in opposition, which means the moon is 30 degrees away. It's a minor aspect to that Pluto. It's over here. It's a blind spot. We don't see it. It's actually in ancient times, it was inconjunct. It was no aspect. It's over here and I can't see it. So, what's going on with our emotions? What's going on with our habit? What is it about creating the box, creating the safety? So often we want to do something in a way that's different. And yet, when crisis happens, default to what we know because it feels safer, it feels better. So, I feel like the challenge with this isn't so much the fact that we're having a tight aspect to Pluto and Aquarius. The challenge is that we have to adjust. Those we're interacting with have to adjust. We all have to change at the same time. And we're not aware of how that feels. We're not aware of the moon in Capricorn, the emotional attachment, the memory that we have to those structures. If we say something like, and I'm just going to use this phrase because it has been bantied about in the popular media so much. If we say something like dismantle the fill in the blank structure, the institution that we want to dismantle, well, to say it is one thing, but how am I going to do it? And how does it feel to do that? And what will take its place? And do I feel a sense of connection or safety to that? There's a lot that happens not just in our mind. And I think that the Pluto and Aquarius can make us think about what needs to happen, but be oblivious to how that feels. And is something sustainable and doable if it doesn't feel good, if it feels like it reminds me of something that has boxed me in, if it feels like a repeat of the abuse of power from authority, if it feels like something I went through with one of my parents, we're not going to stick with it. So there's this having to be more aware, more conscious, which I always associate with the sun in a transit, having to be much more conscious about our unconscious emotions and feelings. And this could be as simple as I have to become more aware about my feelings of adulting, of taking authority, of feeling that I am confident. Maybe the lack of confidence is really a big hiccup, and it's just something I need to see with clarity so that we can make the adjustments so that we can go forward. I think it's going to be interesting how people handle this aspect.
Yeah. I want to say one thing. I think what astrology really teaches us, even though it's night and day, it's Cancer opposing Capricorn. I think the biggest lesson I've heard with astrology is it's not, even when we talk about opposition, it's not really opposition. Everything happens within a circle. It's about integrating all those aspects
Yes.
and not having one versus the other. It's not mommy versus daddy. It's not day versus night. And I think this is the dangerous water that we go into. And Saturn, actually, in Capricorn as well, can bring a lot of fear around the structures. Because, like you say, when we
Mhm.
talk about dismantle something, whatever it is, dismantle our department, do you know what I mean? Payroll department. And suddenly, who's going to do payrolls? Actually, we can give it to third party. We can do this. There are other options, right? Sometimes unraveling something can be really scary, but this is when we're talking about rebel with the vision. vision. Like Aquarius has that vision of the future.
Mhm.
If we trust that vision, we know we can get there. But Saturn in Capricorn, when we say to Saturn, try to put everything, it's scary. It's scary when we say that we need to change that. Again, if you've been through a structure change at home, you had to, I don't know, knock down a wall or to expand your
Right.
kitchen or do any redecoration like this, it's stressful and scary because you don't know, especially if you live in a like old house or something, where those freaking wires are you not going to cut through electric wire? Is hopefully that wall was definitely not the wall that was holding something and then it goes straight on your head. But what you're trying to do, and no one says that put the blindfold on, just go with it. When we're talking about dismantling, Saturn still teaches us it's step by step. Let's get the plans, let's check, let's make sure that we're not going to knock down the one pillar that's holding our ceiling. But we can then work around that and dismantle everything else. And I think very often we are being reactive. It's like people say, oh, dismantle this. You're going to knock down my whole house. No, I don't. I just want to
Right.
expand the kitchen into the living room and I have a plan and I know which walls need to stay because they are the walls that support the house, support the ceiling, support the first floor, and which walls are not necessarily and they just prevent the flow of the house. And if you take that metaphor and put it everywhere else, this is very often what people are afraid. I've lived in that house for 40 years and there was nothing wrong with it. No. But actually, things change, your family grew, and now that house may be just not being fit for the family, or we
Right.
need an extra bathroom, or we need a bigger table because suddenly there's more of us. Things change. Every time when I hear at work, especially again in a corporate world, the whole idea of it's worked for so many years, why do we need to change? I always ask, horseback riding worked for so many years, why did we switch to cars?
Yeah.
For convenience, because the world moved on, because I'm not saying everything is always better, with changing for the better, but we can't stick with the mentality of Saturn that is rigid and freezes us in the past. And that's something that Saturn and Capricorn can do very well.
Yeah.
And that as well with people who achieve things. The old celebrities, people who won gold medal. 50 years later, they still relive something that they did when they were 13. And it's amazing you achieved something, but what else have you done in the 50 years after? And this is where Saturn and Capricorn can be very, very good. It can trap us and hold us into that biggest achievement, into that safety and security, into that structure that feels good.
Yeah.
And suddenly something shifts and we have to adjust. And that's Aquarius. I think pandemic was very Aquarian in a way that shifted the whole structure of our work life in so many countries
Yeah.
and gave us something new. Suddenly people got laptops to work from home, where a year before, even month before, if you ask a manager to work from home full time, the manager would be like, are you crazy? And now the whole office potentially work from home, if that was possible. So this is very much it's Capricornian thing. We need to be careful on the full moon to see where we are rigid and where are we frozen in fear of the new, of the Aquarian.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about throwing baby with the bathwater, but actually understanding when we're talking about revolution, are we talking of burning everything to the ground? Or are we talking about knocking down few walls to open up a space and doing something else? And instead of saying, I don't want to, just ask, what is it that you want to do? What's the plan? Where do you see that change happening? Be curious. That might be a better way of working with that Capricorn energy.
Yeah. And I think that this particular full moon with this contact that's happening between the sun, the moon with Pluto, it may not be for all of us that we're experiencing a huge revolution per se, but there's something that needs to change, and we're feeling the need for that change. And the mere thought of that change can stimulate fear, can bring, remember, Pluto tends to bring up our deep seated fear, and it can also stimulate this we see where things will lead. So for right now, it might just be I'm choosing to have 1 day a week at home to take care of the garden, let's say. That's not huge in of itself, but unconsciously, right, that moon, that blind spot, unconsciously, we know or sense that if I do that action and that one step, I'm going to want to make this my life and I'm going to want to quit that job. Like, in other words, it's not necessarily the change I'm doing right now. It's that change leads to the next change, leads to the next. And so I feel like a lot of us will respond to that fear by pulling back, as you mentioned, a reactionary knee jerk, getting stuck in our box because that box is safe. And there's a phrase that keeps running through my mind of better the devil than the one you don't. So the fear of where change will lead us, or not feeling that we're in control of those changes, or having some doubt or lack. Again, this all goes back to our inner Capricorn. If we're not parenting ourselves, if we're not feeling confident that we have what it takes to manage these changes, then it's going to intensify the fear. And fear, for a lot of people, fear is doubt or it's uncertainty or it's hesitancy. So if you're not feeling fear, I would say take the word that fits for you and put it in there. But there's definitely this holding back that that feels very strong and very ominous to me in this chart overall. And that connects, I think, to that Neptune. Did you have something else to say about Pluto, or can we move to Neptune?
I, I
Okay,
could, I
we
could
could
talk, but
never stop
no.
talking about Pluto, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I was thinking Neptune as well.
Because the T squared to Neptune, here's the thing. Neptune, it's not new that it's in Pisces. It's been there for some time. We've been dealing with it for some time, but it's at 29 degrees. It's stationary. And hey, it's Neptune in the sign it is the modern ruler of in Pisces. That is a lot to contend with at once. I think overall, if you were to break that down, it brings confusion. I am confused. I don't know what is the habitual pattern that's happening. I don't see it, but maybe I feel it. I don't understand why somebody's behavior or somebody's comment suddenly felt like a trigger and caused me to respond, or somebody responded to me that way. How did we get into this automatic scenario? I don't understand why I'm scared. Something that normally I would do suddenly feels scary. Like, I think the T squared to Neptune, it's not about, it's breaking down, but it's not a conscious, let's dismantle, let's make choices, let's tackle this thing in front of us. Neptune is much more the sugar cube dissolving slowly in the warm cup of tea kind of energy. If it's making a square to Capricorn, we're losing the structures that we've come to rely on to get from point A to point B. And if it's making a square to that Cancer, we may be losing what has given us a sense of emotional foundation or something that it feels like my security blanket. I may not like it, but it makes me feel safe. And I think that those things, they may not necessarily be pulled away from us immediately. If you have a side hustle job that has given you extra money, perhaps it's not ending because a full moon just happened, but suddenly the business is going down, the revenue is going down, the clientele, and you feel like sand running through your fingers. I just can't hold, there's no structure anymore. Because perhaps it's time to let that thing, whatever the thing is for you, to let it go. So I think it's really important to look at our natal charts once again and really understand what houses are your Cancer, Capricorn, and Pisces. What are the themes in life about those houses? Because there's something going on there about you having to step into your own authority and it feeling very scary. And what is it that we have to let go? We have to allow it to dissolve away. And it feels the universe is guiding the boat and not giving us the plan rather than us getting to steer it ourselves.
I feel like I'm having a personal reading by you now. Thinking about my own houses in Capricorn, in Pisces, and in Cancer, I feel like literally you're just doing a reading for me. But yeah, I agree with everything you say. I think again that square, that tension with Neptune talks about delusion and illusion that we create for ourselves, that or that we sign up for in this world. And again, on that polarity between Cancer and Capricorn is where is it that we take accountability for ourselves, and where do we have that emotional maturity from the Cancer to be able to deal with that and not sign up blindly. Piscean waters can be really deceptive. It's this kind of idea of a mermaid singing beautifully and then drowning you. So this is the idea of the sailor who put a wax in his ears to be able to avoid the mermaid song and actually get to the next shore. So it's this, I have a plan, I know what to do, I am confident with myself, I know that I need to get to the other shore, and not being led astray by those beautiful singing mermaids. And Piscean waters are full of beauty and monsters. That's the depth that we not necessarily understand. This is the symbol of our collective unconscious, or collective dreams and collective fears. In collective, we have a lot of shame and regret and fear and hurt and pain. But also, we have a lot of compassion and dreams for the better future, our prayers for the better future. That's all kind of held within that Piscean theme, Piscean waters. So for me, that square to this full moon is unpacking yet another layer.
Yeah.
We're talking about, where is it that I need to figure out between my mommy and my daddy? Where is that maternal emotional side of me that I can self-regulate and nurture myself when I need it? Where is that paternal side of me that I can use to be in my own authority, to put my own boundaries, to feel empowered and masterful in my field? And those two are being pulled into direction of illusions and delusions, of vision.
Yeah.
Both can be creative, one can be destructive. Actually, both can be destructive. Even vision sometimes can be destructive. But one can build something, another one can destroy.
Yes. I love that illusion and delusion. That feels so ripe. And the fact that we don't just have, I mean, granted, we have the square to Neptune, but Neptune's not our only Piscean water, right? We've got Saturn and
Mhm.
co-present in this sign of Pisces with that Neptune, and both of them are going retrograde. We're going to have
Yeah.
Saturn on the 29th and then Neptune on the 2nd of next month, like pretty close together. So there's a whole lot of it almost feels like we're just jumping into the deep end of a
Yeah.
swimming pool. No more playing around in the kiddie pool and getting comfortable with the waters. We're getting thrown in. I had my grandfather, that was actually his favorite way to teach us to swim. Okay, here we go. And you're thrown in this, that moment of panic. I'm going to drown. I'm going to be overwhelmed. But then you start to do the doggy paddle and you realize, no, I'm
Mm.
not. I'm here. And he would throw it, he would jump in and get you if you were really struggling.
Yeah.
But that feeling of, oh my gosh, I
Mhm.
kind of sense that there may be a lot of emotional overwhelm that hits
Yeah.
us. And one of the challenges that we can get with a lot of Pisces energy, especially if we're
Mm.
dealing with Saturn retrograde on top of the Neptune retrograde, is escapism can be so strong. I
Yeah.
think that one of the challenges here can be, are we willing to stay present? Are we willing to do the work, to face the challenges, to put on our big girl panties, to roll up our sleeves, to do the hard work? Or is it so overwhelming and so scary and so emotional that I don't want to deal with that? And so we would rather binge
Yeah.
TV, or we're going to sleep, or we're going to want to escape in some way. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying a little escapism might not be useful. The weekend getaway, the family vacation, like these could be very nurturing for our soul, as long as when it's
Mhm.
over, we come back and we're ready to tackle the work in front of us. The gift here, I think, is the fact that there is an opportunity to really step into that vision. You and I and Anne have talked at length about Saturn's journey through Pisces and the push-pull here of, if you dream it, you can build it. By the same token, if we try to start building based on the dream and we don't do the work of creating the floor plan and everything first, we're in trouble. But there's something about having this strong wave of Pisces energy coming at us that I think can open us up to remembering the dreams. If we started something a year ago or 2 years ago or back in 2020, what is the dream that we held that maybe it has stalled and it's time
Yeah.
to reinvigorate it, replan, rebuild in some way? I love when things are retrograde, when we go back and revisit an old idea or an ongoing idea and really assess what is working, what's not working. And I think this is an opportunity to reconnect and rebuild some of our dreams, our visions that maybe we either lost touch with or that are just, they are struggling. They're doing the doggy paddle and not moving
Yeah.
forward.
For me, I agree with everything you say. I think, again, we've talked at length about how to use that energy. And again, what we always try to present in our episode is those are the themes and archetypes, and they can manifest in multiple ways. And very often it's up to us to see how can we navigate. Are we conscious enough to navigate that? Or are we unconscious enough to be swept away? And for me, Saturn in Pisces, Saturn retrograde, and again with Neptune retrograde, there is that element of being pulled into collective fears. And what we've mentioned, what stood out for me as well, is that Mars in Taurus and Mercury in Cancer kind of speaks to this as well. This idea of war with words, the idea of Mars and Mercury coming together in feminine sides in Taurus and in Cancer, and having that, again, it's a sextile, so it's a really nice aspect, but those are the planets that can really go straight for it. And that when I'm looking at both of them, one thing that kind of comes to mind is that war with words, whether it's media, whether it's being pulled into conversation, whether it's pulled into conversation of scarcity with Taurus, conversation around maturity and emotions with Cancer, and again, belonging with Cancer. There's a lot going on around media now about belonging and where's the land that you can or cannot be. It's very Taurian and Cancerian discussion, right? But those discussions are getting weaponized. And for me, that goes back to that Saturn in Pisces dragging us into collective fears. What I think it's really prevalent at the moment in discussions in the radio and is our collective unconscious bringing the fears and shadow to light, and we're having those discussions. So again, what is it that we're doing? Are we diving into our own understanding of our own fears? Why am I getting triggered? What's going on that person or that nation or that religion or that neighbor is triggering me? And do I have enough of vision and compassion to do something about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the way you're looking at that Mars and Taurus making a sextile to the Mercury in Cancer. That makes a lot of sense, especially on the collective level. I also think on a very personal level, this can be an exciting energy because we might finally be able to put some energy in action to the ideas that we have. Mercury being not only the words we use, but the ideas that are spinning in our mind. And due to the fact that we were talking at the last new moon about the month of June itself had so much Gemini energy leading up to this full moon that we're looking at now. The past 2, 3 weeks, it's been this tons of Gemini energy, a lot of ideas spinning in our mind. And what do I do with it? A lot of people I know, myself included, I feel like Gumby. There's just so many ideas. I keep making lists upon lists, but I don't know what to do first. It's hard to have focus. So now with this sextile between the Mercury and the Mars, I feel like perhaps we can take some of the energy and action drive of Mars and come up with a plan, do some work, be Taurian, and apply ourselves to stepping into doing the work to make some of our ideas more of a reality. At least that's how I'm hoping it's going to be manifesting in my world and for others. So much to talk about. Before we go into our tips and tricks, any final thoughts or other ideas that have come to you?
I think tips and tricks would be good now.
I would think so too. And of course, to those of you that are with us, please put in the comments if you have tips, ideas, tricks, things that you're doing of your own. We'd love to learn from you. And let us know which of these aspects feel like they're hitting you and your chart the strongest. It's always intriguing, I think, to look at a chart and I may think up front, oh, that Pluto is going to be talking to me loud, but suddenly it could be that Neptune that seems to be stealing the show for that day or that week. So we'd love to know how all this is happening for you. All right, Monika, do you have a tip and trick you want to share first, or do you want me to go first?
I think I can go first.
Yeah.
So for me, again, goes back to that parental discussions that we had. I would say if you have space, if you have the kind of full moon ritual where you can sit back and have a bit of a reflection, I would suggest to reflect on your parental image. Which one of your parents or caregivers was that stable structure parent? And reflect on what is it that you've learned from them, but then flip it and say, actually, what is it that you've learned from them that now is holding you back? And do that without judgment, do that with love. But again, things that we learn from our parents and they learn from their parents and they learn from their caregivers, what worked something 20 years ago, at the moment, it might actually hold you back. Learning to take accountability and responsibility for 5 of your your younger siblings might have been amazing, might have put you on a path of amazing career, but now maybe you are actually being overwhelmed, burned out, and taking too much because you've learned that actually it's always your responsibility, and you struggle with delegating at work, you struggle with co-working and so on. So I would say have a look at which was the parent or the caregiver that gave you that structure, that taught you something like to master it yourself, and honor that Capricorn. Maybe write them a letter about how you don't have to send it, but how amazing and how many things you've learned from them. But then flip that and learn and write yourself a letter of all the things that you're willing to let go. Full moon, Kimberly, you always remind us that full moon is not just about celebrating the achievements, but also we're turning now into letting go side of the moon cycle. What is it that you can let go without obviously damaging that structure for yourself? So that would be my little tip.
Mine is also involving a letter, but this is something that I do every year. So I mentioned that this full moon is happening within 24 hours of the summer solstice. I would say this is a perfect time to spend the day before this full moon really soaking in some of that sunlight, some of the energy. We've been talking about a lot of the heavy things here. Soak in the joy, soak in the joys of summer, soak in some of that Piscean, what fills your soul energy, and write your winter self a letter. Write a letter to yourself now. Seal it up, address it to yourself, and put it somewhere where you will be able to find it on the winter solstice. And as we get close to the holidays, then sometimes rereading what was going on when I had tons of energy and life was busy and so much was happening can be a source of inspiration when we're in the cold and the dark and trying to get things done, but it's hard to move around or it's hard to make time for ourselves in the hustle bustle months of December. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm using this full moon to bring some illumination and allow my unconscious self to write, um, partner up with my conscious mind and write the wisdom that I need to share with my future self. And there's actually apps they have out there now that you can go online and do this, and it will send it to you if you're a person who tends to forget. Or you can be like me and put it in that safe spot and put it on your calendar now for winter solstice to find and read your letter.
That is pretty cool. I'm going to do that as well. I'm going to do that, especially that in 6 months, there's so much that can change and turn.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also smiling when you say soak up the sun. We have 14 degrees Celsius and grey and rainy heavens in Birmingham in
Oh my
UK.
gosh.
It's going to be, apologies, 57. Still
That's
cold.
still, that's
Still
still,
cold
that's
and
cold.
rainy. Yeah.
So
So
it's
so
100
it's
degrees.
very November ready.
It's like 100 degrees Fahrenheit here with a close to 100% humidity. So soaking in the sun
Wow.
usually means you're out before 6:30 a.m. or you're
Yeah.
soaking it through the window as you sit in an air-conditioned room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, if like me struggling to actually see the sun in the sky, if you're in UK, just get yourself one of those lamps.
Happy summer, y'all, wherever you
Yeah,
live and
happy
however the
summer
weather's treating
solstice.
you. All right. See everybody back in 2 weeks. Anne will be with us. And don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, review, rate us, do whatever it is so that you will be reminded when we're back. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us in this week's AstroChat. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion and would love to hear about anything that resonated with you. Keep the conversation going by posting shareable content on our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube pages. You can also email us at astrochatpodcast@gmail.com. AstroChat is uploaded every 2 weeks on the Saturday before each new and full moon. Look for us on your favorite podcast platform as well as on YouTube. You can support AstroChat and receive exclusive content by donating on our Patreon page. We look forward to chatting with you all again at the next lunation of the moon.